we haven't asked you, Omar, in the earnings call, the biggest potential challenge that Tesla said was that they're working hard to grow current volumes, but the current constraints are the battery pack. Then Elon said, I think we'll make progress on addressing that constraint, and then things are going to really go ballistic next year, and then really ballistic 2027, 28. He said also that we just had a meeting before this earnings call talking about the plan for battery constraints. And then another part of the conversation, I think he said, that we have to make a decision on choosing, which do we want batteries? I can't remember exact words, guys. Was it like batteries for mobile versus batteries for stationary? What's your thoughts on what he was talking about battery constraints, Omar?
Well, I mean, you look at what's happening with trade, with tariffs, and they have essentially lost access to their major cell supplier, CATL, in the United States. So if you remember, CATL used to provide the battery for the base Model 3 and Y. During the Biden administration, I think there were tariffs of 25% placed on Chinese batteries, which made them, unviable. And also the EV tax credit complicated things as well. So they're really going to have to rely on domestic sourcing for the United States. I think it's encouraging that they're making about 125,000 Cybertrucks a year worth of 4680s. But I think really the key here is going to be suppliers like Panasonic ramping up 4680 production, as well as them potentially starting to produce LFP cells themselves here in the United States. So I don't think they're just sitting idle here. I think they have plans to deal with some of these issues. But, it is a tough issue when you have something like battery production that can't just ramp up overnight in many cases. This is, hard physical work. You're seeing China increasingly restrict the export of some minerals, place tariffs on them. So I think this is something that they have a plan to work with LFP and 4680 expanded locally and with suppliers, but it could be a limiter on growth. And of course, I think they may be looking at putting some of these LFP cells in stationary storage products as well. But if they are dealing with a fixed supply, there may be a trade-off there about whether to ramp up stationary storage, which actually in some cases has higher margins now than the auto business, or to put those into vehicles. So, batteries have always been a challenge. I think one thing that could really alleviate the concern is if some sort of trade agreement were reached with China where there weren't these sort of tariffs on LFP batteries from China. But my current feeling is that that's unlikely given the political climate. However, with Musk in the White House, you never know. I'm a little bit surprised that the EV tax credit still exists, and yet here we are.
Yeah. On the other hand, the other big news we heard last week was there's actually a third Megapack factory. So we're all still deciding. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to the battery constraint, this is a constraint to the new higher volumes. And this is with the introduction of potential, when you're doing supply planning, they're planning with all the network effects accounted for. And they're associating different probabilities, but they're looking at, does that LFP tariff go to 100%, for example? And I wouldn't bet on any kind of battery relief. Maybe we'll get mineral relief, but I think that if I were to place bets, I think the President Trump's administration would want to promote production in the United States. So I think it's a race to getting domestic production of cells in the U.S. And I've been telling people the Megapacks. The Megapacks have LFPs, and they're at risk. So I don't know what their strategy. I wish an analyst would have asked a question on the call, like, like, what did you do? Like, did you bring in 3 months of inventory? Like, how are you preparing for these, what could be, they could tariff. The other thing is China could put an export restriction. There was talk, and it was published in Bloomberg, other sources of China doing an export restriction as a response to the U.S. Tariff escalation. Now, so far, the China response has been fairly measured, and it's almost their response was like, "Hey, we're going to put some tariffs back on you, but we also kind of want to work with you." It wasn't they weren't trying to bludgeon the U.S. in China's response this morning. So it feels like they want to work. I guess they're going to have some sort of call or discussion between the presidents here soon, and then we'll see where that goes. But if I were a betting person, I would bet that the battery tariffs go in and they become more aggressive. And, I think Tesla is preparing for that. And I think, like I said, I think they'll be in a good spot, but they have to solve the LFP constraint. It's going to allow them to ramp the lower end on the automobile side, and it's going to allow them to keep going along on the Megapack side. So this is primarily a U.S. issue, but it could become a global issue here pretty soon.
Yeah, I think that if they begin producing LFP batteries in the United States, that would be huge. And we have some indications that they've been working on doing this. There was a patent that recently Drew Baglino, the former SVP of Powertrain, commented on, and they had essentially patented a process for making LFP cathodes in a way that they said was much more efficient, required less capital, less space. And, if they were to start making LFP domestically, which, Drew's comment was something like, those who are starting to make LFP domestically should, use this process. And obviously there is a IRA $45 a kilowatt hour battery production credit for domestically produced batteries. This seems unlikely to go away given what we've heard from Congress. So even if I think the $7,500 credit goes away, this will stay. So if you have domestically produced LFP, which is cheaper, has less supply constraints in terms of the iron and materials actually used to make the cathode, and then you've got a $45 a kilowatt hour production credit, this is probably going to cover almost half the cost of the battery pack. So that would be, I think, absolutely explosive if they announced a plan to produce LFP batteries here in the United States. Obviously, I think it would take time to ramp it up, but that could be really important for the Cybercab, for some of the new vehicles, and even the lower end 3 and Y.
Yeah, and to that point about production and the tax credit, it looks like the Congress now, with the appointees that President Trump pulled to his cabinet, it's going to go from like a 3 or 4 seat advantage down to like a 2, maybe 1 seat, probably 2 seat advantage in Congress for Republicans. So you're saying to yourself, like, everybody thinks like, since November 5th, since the election, like, oh, it's a slam dunk. Everything EV is going away. EV mandates going. It didn't really, like, you notice like there was rhetoric a week or so ago, but we haven't seen the net effects of that. So you have the consumer credit, which I think would be on the chopping block, but this is a law, and you have a 2-seat majority in Congress, and you need a new law. And so the Treasury Secretary, I'm sure he has some discretion about how many cars are on that list and so forth, and that's fine. But in general, it has to align to the framework of the law. So now you're saying, well, how do you get a new law done? And it was one other key point I think the audience should be aware of. There's a 2-seat Republican majority, but 14 of those Republicans signed a letter in August. I posted this on my X account before, recently, even last week. They signed a letter, and they sent a letter to the Speaker of the House saying, like, we hear all this talk about IRA credit and it's risky, blah, blah, blah. Like, we're a proponent of it. We want it. Like, we basically, the summary of the letter is like, we built these battery factories in our district. And that's what people should be aware of. while there's this outsized risk of all the rhetoric on the Republican side, getting rid of, Green New Scam, this or that, realize this very smart thing that was done, and part of it's because of these places are easier to do business. The battery factories are like 80% of them or more are built in red districts and in red states. And so if you're a congressperson or a senator, you don't want to pass a law that puts people in the street that you just got employed in these battery factories. So they're not going to be single issue voters, but there's 14 of them that expressed concern about it that were Republicans. So I think they're going to have a hard time, like it's almost like healthcare. Like they're going to have a hard time like killing Obamacare. I think this would even be a higher challenge, a harder challenge for them to kill all this stuff outright. So what I think they'll do something like a repeal and replace of like, we're going to get rid of the word IRA, we're going to get rid of these things, but in the end, it's going to be a credit for battery manufacturing, and it may or may not be a credit for EV purchases, probably not. But I think, as Omar said, I think the battery credits, it'll just be under a new name. It'll be a made in the USA energy credit, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, long story short, they do not have the votes for a blanket repeal of the IRA. That's kind of the stunning thing here. And critically, as you mentioned, and this is kind of the genius part of the IRA, is if you have a battery production credit, nobody wants to build batteries in a blue state because it's way too expensive. So all of the factories were built in red states. So you've got a handful of Republican senators who are not going to support the repeal of that provision. Now, like Jeff said, the consumer credit, they could maybe find the votes for that, but even that isn't a certainty. And I think at this point, if they do repeal it, it'll probably be a 2026 start date since the 2025 tax year's already begun. So it's likely, I think, that the battery credits are going to survive even through the Trump administration. If you recall, in Trump's first term, they wanted to repeal Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. They were able to repeal some provisions, such as the insurance mandate, where you had to buy insurance or pay a penalty. But a lot of provisions of the Affordable Care Act are still in place to this day. So that's kind of my base expectation for what we see with the IRA as well.
Yep.
Okay. Warren, did you have any comments on that, on battery constraints at all, or?
I thought that I was shocked that the analyst didn't ask it. I shouldn't expect so much of them. I think what I see is, are we talking about? I think the most likely battery constraint is 2170. As far as Shanghai, I don't think the Shanghai Gigafactory has a shortage of LFP. Right? I think there's plenty of LFP in China, so it's probably not Shanghai that's the problem. It could be Europe. I don't know, but I don't think Giga Berlin is producing that much anyway. I think it's probably American production. Elon did mention there was a trade-off between energy and cars and this battery constraint. So Powerwall, I think, uses 2170, and so do the cars. I don't think Tesla's using LFP in many cars in America anymore. I could be wrong about that.
Megapacks.
Megapacks.
Right. So Megapacks use LFP, but then there's no trade-off between the cars if the cars aren't using LFP, unless they've decided not to produce LFP cars because Megapack needs the LFP. But Elon seemed to say they were favoring cars over energy because I think the value generated by the cars is more than the value generated by the energy. So I think it's an LFP problem, but I think it could be a 2170 problem because Panasonic has never really done a good job of ramping production of 2170. I'm just guessing here. And
typically, it's a mixture. Typically, in these cases, when you have so many chemistries, and then you have these geopolitical or tariff overlays, a hole in one area creates the holes in other areas where you have limited flexibility. So yeah, it's probably both.
Yeah, and then the question is, why is there an LFP shortage when China manufactures a crazy volume of LFP? So is it that they can't import the LFP, or the tariffs are too high on importing LFP? Is it that there's just rapidly increasing demand in China for LFP battery cells because they're making so many EVs? I didn't think that was an issue. I thought there was actually a shortfall of demand, and maybe did the LFP manufacturers in China cut back? Are they going for higher margin forms of LFP, like the 5C charge rate forms of LFP? There shouldn't be a shortage of LFP. That's the thing, that the China's just manufacturing at a massive volume. So my best guess is still like it's not 1860s, right? It's not the ones for Model S and X because they don't make many Model S and X, and it's not 4680 either because they said they're making enough 4680. So I just wish an analyst would have said, "Can you tell us more about this battery constraint?" And they didn't ask.
Yeah, the only thing I would just say is that when you're making a supply plan and you're assigning probabilities, my guess is what Tesla is doing is sure they'll take LFPs in the U.S., but there is this Section 301 tariff, and I don't know if it starts in May or if it's already on, but it was ratcheting from 7%, I think, to 25% on LFP. I just don't know what the exact date is. But the point is when you're making a supply plan, and then one of the likely scenarios is that the tariff goes to 100% or it turns into an export restriction from China. What you do then is you assign a probability of that happening and you remove it from your supply plan, and then it turns into a shortage. But I don't know. So we don't know. You're right. I'm like, I wish like Tesla said it's limiting our business, and analysts didn't ask the question. And then question number 2 should have been, oh, we hear that there's tariffs coming in 48 hours. What are your thoughts on that? And because GM, this was funny, GM went through the call and said, here's our earnings, here's our guidance for the year. And oh, by the way, tariffs could be coming, but we didn't assume anything in our numbers for tariffs. And I just don't think that that's appropriate when you're GM, you literally have enterprise risk. Like if it's a 25% tariff on Mexico, as we just discussed, like you have a major problem in the US and it literally hits your business in like a week or two. So I'm surprised that they didn't talk about it and no analysts didn't ask about it.
Well, just to remind everybody, this is what Elon actually said. He said, we are working hard to grow current volumes. Current constraints are battery packs. I think we will make progress on addressing that constraint, and then things are really going to go ballistic next year and then really ballistic in 2027, 28. So sounds very confident.
But Herbert, there was another moment where he talked about a trade-off between energy and
mobile
and
versus stationary. Yeah. Yeah, which means that there's that decision, right? That's why they did not give a guidance for volume.
Mobile versus stationary, then it's not battery pack, it's battery cell, right? If it's battery pack, it's like, well, we're having trouble ramping battery pack production, which doesn't seem sensible since they're not making more cars than they were before. They should be able to make enough battery packs. So I think it has to be a cell constraint, not a pack constraint.
Yeah, it's a cell issue. And the one final thing I'll just say on that LFP patents, if I were on that call, I would have been like, well, great. We heard like you have these patents in, that's great. Like there's a big difference between we have patents and then we have an engineering design that passes reliability, passes longevity, and is ready to go into production. And then there's another big difference between having that and then having the production solution designed. And then there's a third big thing of like, when is your CapEx ramped on it? Like there's 3 questions around US LFP that they could have asked if they had an informed view, and they didn't. So I don't know. In my mind, I don't know where they're at on the LFP patents between that and a scaled production solution, and that would have been the question to ask. And once they have that, that's why I think he says it goes ballistic in 26, because you have the low cost structure and then you have the supply, stateside. You don't have to depend on imports anymore.
Well, and if they're going to make Cybercab in volume, and Cybercab's going to use LFP, and Drew says that Tesla's patent for production of LFP is going to make it lower cost than Chinese production of LFP, well, now Cybercab just becomes even more insanely profitable.
Yeah, that's a game changer.
One of the things that we've been hearing more is this idea that we should ask Tesla if the retail, instead of like voting and having that be 10 questions, there should be like a group of us that comes up and really well-crafted questions. I really like that idea. So hopefully,
so do you know the history that I got a call from Martin Viecha and several of us got calls from Martin Viecha, like when the say things had started and had been going for a few quarters.
Mm-hmm.
They called me, they called Rob, they called Emmett, and a few others, and said, please stop trying to influence the saytechnologies.com. If we catch you doing it, we're going to remove the question.
Mm.
Like, because Rob was getting the number one question, and Emmett was getting the number two question, and my questions actually weren't making it to the top. My questions were like right outside the bubble. I think I got one in. But influencers were driving the questions, and they want it to be organic. I think they want the questions to not be informative. I think they're happy that the questions are not informative because
Interesting.
it protects them from having to give away the secrets.
Very interesting.
I think the reason no one asked is that nobody really cares. I mean, for the first time that we can remember, delivery volume was actually down year over year. So I think the question on analysts' minds is really, what does the demand profile look like when you factor in potential tariffs, potential cost increases? What does the pricing look like and what's the demand at that level? If they were expanding like crazy, maybe battery constraints become more pressing. But, for me as an investor, even if, let's say, there's a severe battery constraint, then deliveries are flat again in 2025 or even down. If they start a rideshare service in Austin, not even by June, hell, by December, I don't really care. I don't think that long-term batteries will be an impossible challenge to solve. And I think the street is really focused on the AI side of the business.
How many batteries, how many kilowatt hours does Optimus require?
2.3.
So if the company is focused on revenue growth in another segment, does it really, I mean, it's worth,
Optimus isn't going to be a high volume of demand, and it's 4680s, I believe. And there's no shortage of 4680s right now because they're not manufacturing. They're manufacturing 4680s faster than Cybertruck can use them.
right, semi requires
Finding
a lot of
batteries for Optimus isn't going to be a problem. I think what we really have here is just a supply disruption that's driven by politics. And it's going to be resolved one way or another, I think, ultimately by domestic production. And I think that that's something they've been gearing up to do for a long time, even before these tariffs came into play.
If the questions aren't being asked that you would expect, what is the root cause of that? Is it that the mind frame has shifted to new revenue streams, or is it just?
I think the analysts already had these questions pre-written before the call, probably, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Pierre Ferragu's pre-written questions were, "Hey, how can I get my car to do this?" That was Pierre Ferragu's
I
pre-written
know.
question.
Or the LiDAR thing. That's just crazy. Adam Jonas lost a little bit of respect for him. He had asked that question apparently a couple of years ago too. So just keeps asking the same question. Okay. So folks, if you're in the audience here, this is a top level discussion from the greatest minds. Follow everybody: Alexandra, Jeff, Warren, Omar, you got Simon and Xander, and please follow Cyberbulls as well. That'll be great. We can change the topic now. That's, again, so many choices here. Do you guys, this morning, ARK Invest dropped their big ideas report. There was a couple new metrics there that they pointed out, which I thought was good. And then there's a new price target of $1,000 from Fubon Research from Taiwan. There's always these analysts who want to be way ahead of everyone else. I think we've got Dan Ives at $500, but Fubon is now saying $1,000, which is again, you have to have these guys lead the way. Anybody want to talk about ARK Invest, or what other topics you guys want to talk about? All the new incentives. Alexander, are you there?
I am, but I didn't hear your question.
Do you want to talk ARK Invest? Actually, there's also another question Sanju wanted to ask you. The topic of possibly re-rating of Tesla's credit rating with the S&P and Moody's.
Yeah, I can address that. I don't expect a re-rating soon. I mean, we're on our lowest investment grade. I don't think Tesla is going to spend a dime in motivating them to upgrade. Just for the sake of saying this again, if Tesla would pay for these ratings, we would be AAA. Okay. Does it matter to be AAA? It does not anymore. It did at the point when we were still junk rated, because that prevented a couple of things. But now that's not the case anymore. We're lowest investment grade. We deserve much better, but we're not paying, right? We're not. This whole grift is Tesla is not playing it. So there won't be an upgrade, or there may be an upgrade because we're shaming them into it. I try that time to time. Last quarter, I wasn't really having time to do it, but I can do that again. That's how we got to where we are now. But it's if they're not paying, that's just where we're going to be stuck. Does it matter? Not at all, because in the only really important market where ratings play a role is the swap market. So when Tesla swaps its little debt or uses asset-backed securities to get rid of the leases, to repackage them and all that, that's a moment where derivative traders look at credit ratings and ignore it, because the rates we get are AAA rates. So just forget about it. Rating is not a topic anymore. If we have nothing else to do, we can try and shame those rating agencies again, but it's really not important.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. So ARK Invest, they dropped their report this morning. And in the robotaxi section, they had this one small table there that they showed that, which I liked, right? This table basically shows the progress of Tesla's FSD and when they expect it to, get past human-driven driver accident rate. And it's basically on a table where they have on the x-axis the equivalence of H100 equivalence compute in Tesla's data center. And when you get closer to 200,000, that's what their estimate is. That's when FSD, call it 13.6, somewhere in the second half of 2025, will hit human driver accident rate. They think that version 13.4 will happen this quarter. That will pass where Waymo initially was at, the intervention rate of about 10,000 miles per intervention. I don't know if anybody here saw that. Anybody take a closer look at ARK's research? And anybody want to make any comments on it?
I haven't read it yet. I downloaded it, but I would just say they mentioned version 14. I don't know that there's going to be a version 13.6. I think we're going to see version 14 within 2 or 3 months. And it's just going to be, from what they said on the call, because this was a fairly good topic, I think we're heading towards larger model size. And I don't know, actually, Omar, can you comment on that answer about like what new technologies will be in version 14, or what's going to be? Is it just a larger model and more data, or is there something else going on?
Well, they haven't told us anything about what's in FSD 14 yet.
A really nice table that they had here that I like is this one where they said that in 2014, you had every automaker announce, or during the last decade, during 2014, I think actually this table shows 2017, Tesla says we're going to build autonomous cars. Volvo comes out in 2018 saying they're going to do it. Google's comes out in 2021. GM, Audi, Mercedes, and Nissan also 2021. BMW in 2022. Daimler and Continental. And then they all say we're going to do it, but then there's no expectation of launch for any of these except for Google, Waymo, and Tesla, right? Google owns Waymo. So really only just the software companies, the AI companies, the big tech companies are really the only ones that are able to do this. They also list out the various robotaxi competitors throughout the world, in the United States, China, Saudi Arabia, companies like in the US, it's Tesla, Waymo, Zoox, Wave, Pony AI, WeRide. In China, it's Baidu, WeRide, Tesla, Pony AI, like that.
Herbert, if I could just comment on the analyst calls, your question was, one was Zook, and second was ARK Invest.
Yeah.
just to that point, that what I found, and that I've been a portfolio manager for over 20 years in the industry, and we read all the reports and we get them. I think the important thing, if you're a retail investor, is just to look at and read what the report is. So because the Zook report was in Chinese, or no, sorry, Taiwanese, I think.
Oh, you're talking about the Fubon? The Fubon?
Fubon, yeah, it was in Taiwanese, right?
Yeah, I translated it and I didn't think it came out really well, so.
Yeah, I read a couple of translations as well, like some people like threw it through, and I read, I'm like, well, there's no new information here, which is fine. But I found that ARK Invest, when I read their reports on Tesla, they're actually really, really good.
Yeah.
Now, so I don't want to take any credit away from ARK Invest, because the research they do, especially on Tesla, is excellent. But if you're an analyst on the street and you come out with some outlandish report, whether it be bullish or bearish, you're going to get the attention of the media, and that's going to drive advertising towards your firm. Okay, so I read this most recent report out of Taiwan, and from the translation, there wasn't anything new there.
Yeah.
I don't think they're wrong. I actually think they're pretty accurate, but for the reasons for that price target weren't great. For example, RBC's research, I thought you read the whole like 200-page report, and it's like extremely bearish on their predictions, but at least you see what they're looking at, and they've done the work. And they actually they're very bullish on Tesla. But what I'm saying is, when you look at what they're putting in terms of figures for full self-driving, for autonomy, for robotaxi, no robots actually in their analysis, they're very conservative. But at least they've done the work. And when I look at ARK, they've done the work as well. I really don't want to take anything away from ARK and Kathy Woods and Natasha Keem, what they do, because it's really, really good work. But I have looked into all the other holdings they have, and we've run our own analysis, and we're like, not so much. But and I'm trying to sort of direct people in the right direction, is going, they've actually driven tremendous amount of attention because of the great work that they've done on Tesla. And I think there's a lot of other companies on the street going, hey, look at these guys. They're futuristic. They have a different business model. They've done really good work on this company. They were the first to call out Tesla, and now they're also the highest on the street. But it gets them on the shows, and it drives traffic and volume or investment into their ETFs. And so I think there's other companies on the street that are saying, hey, if we come out with some outlandish bullish or bearish view, it's going to get a lot of attention to our firm. And so all I do is I come back and I read these reports and go, so what's your base? And I've honestly found the retail community, most people here, Herbert, that listen to the space, the models that I've seen are way better than a lot of the stuff we found on Wall Street. Not taken away from what ARK does. Their research, and when I've read their papers, phenomenal. But yeah, I just want to put that out there. Take it with a grain of salt when you're looking at Wall Street reports, and read the report, and then just look at, well, how accurate are they? I mean, I think it's Adam Jonas. He's always been bullish on Tesla, but he assumes that they won't sell more than 50,000 Cybertrucks per year, right? So you sort of have to take these things with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's a good way to make sure you think about things appropriately. For our ARK Invest, there's that one slide, okay, slide 81. And then this is the question I want to ask the panel here, if you guys agree with this. So first off, do you agree that the amount of compute that Tesla has in H100 equivalents is the right measure to measure whether or not you think that the miles between critical intervention will rise? So they have, and then the second question is, do you think, based on their scale, that they are expecting that Tesla will have 120,000 compute in H100 equivalent GPUs by March and 190,000 by October? And when they get to the March number, that's when they expect that Tesla's FSD will be equivalent to 1 year of personal driving. So one critical engagement for 10,000 miles. So like if you're one person driving, you'd have one critical engagement per year. And then by the time in October, when you have 190,000 H100 equivalents, you'll get to 700,000 miles before critical intervention. That is the national average for human accident rates. So I personally agree that this is the right measure is compute. If you can measure how fast Tesla is going to have more compute, then you can gauge at that point how quickly FSD will get the magnitude growth of miles between critical intervention. And then the second question is, do you think that they're shooting for 190,000? Where did they get these numbers from? One of the things I was pointing out with the earnings call last week was I was shocked that we did not see a table showing what their plans are for compute this year. And they did. They showed it last earnings call, and they've been showing that table. So I'm expecting it to come out soon, hopefully, for 2025. Jeff or Omar or anybody else want to jump on that?
I would just say that they did say they expect the cost of compute to go down, and they expect to spend the same amount,
right,
as they have said before. So if they're spending the same amount and the cost is coming down, I don't think the cost spending the same amount, but the cost per unit of compute goes down. So I think we can expect that we have a 50,000 unit cluster now. We're going to have a 100,000 unit cluster by the end of the year, if not 150,000, A100 equivalent.
Yeah, well, these guys are saying you need to have 190,000 by October to hit the miles between intervention.
I don't know what qualifies them to come up with that. I mean, that's a good question. Why are these guys qualified to offer that opinion?
Well,
look, I mean, it's obviously a dramatic oversimplification. You can kind of plot out the growth of compute and the performance of the system and establish some correlation, but simply plugging in a bunch of GPUs isn't going to do anything, right? There's execution involved, there's data set, there's a lot of other variables. So, it's just an oversimplification. But honestly, this one is in the bag from what I've seen. They have basically proven they can do this. This approach works. AI scaling up like crazy. They're leapfrogging Waymo in every measure. This may not be obvious to everybody yet. A lot of people have AI3 cars. A lot of people are maybe in areas where they're still seeing difficulties. But in terms of launching an unsupervised service in one city, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's probable that it could happen this year. If not, I think next year it's almost a certainty. So, they are going to add more compute this year than they did last year. Given what was going on in the news with the whole DeepSeek market panic, which turned out to be completely unfounded, that may not have been the best time to kind of highlight that graph. I don't know if a decision was made there, an editorial decision from the IR team, but they're going to be adding more compute capacity this year, especially with the new Texas data center, than they did in 2024.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.